Two arguments from Prime Minister. First argument is ballot operation within Parliament, but second, why like CRA have better electability in counterfactual. But first of all, I want to clarify the stance of the government side. We want like CRA to be stronger to the extent they would to the extent that they would not disturb what disturb Takaichi administration. Uh, I mean, we like support like some particular like other Takaichi administration's like good policy which is necessary for Japanese growth. But secondly, we want CRA to be strong to the extent they won't allow LDP to win at the next election with the with max huge extent. But third of all, we want like CRA to be the strongest and huge opposition party. Not and we want to like prevent the situation where like so many like small opposition party exist and there's no like the clear accountability exists within like opposition parties group and there's no like great like ukezara for like the people who want to support opposition party or who want to oppose LDP. Then I want to clarify the Japanese politics in the status quo and what's the stance of LDP currently right now. They are like taking the stance of mixed stance of like they like support the redistribution while they also support like some sort of like economic growth. For example, that they're supporting like reducing consumption tax and like increasing tax for like rich people or entrepreneur, while they are like having they're having like a policy of like economic growth. For example, they are investing into like semiconductor industry or military industry. Then what happening in this status quo is that like CRA is like particularly opposing against the LDP's economic growth policy, and therefore for the perspective of なんか liberal and なんかGenki generation, there's no reasonable option other than like LDP or for example なんか Team Mirai and so on. Then first argument, why we have better operation of parliament. The first thing to note here is like we will have the we will say that good policy will pass quicker. I mean, for example, there's some like necessary policy for like Japanese economic growth. For example, it's necessary for Japan to invest into semiconductor for to adopt the なんかthe growth of AI industry, and also like it's necessary for like Japan to invest into military or like industry to for example they export a massive amount of like the なんか weapons to なんか for example なんか US とか then make money and that can while the problem happening in Cisco here is the CRA is opposing that kind of particular policies. And what's the problem here? The first thing note here is that this will necessarily delay the discussion within the parliament, which necessarily means that they can the Japan are like this disadvantage to have a first mover advantage within the like global market. But second problem here is that they will shrink the budget for investment because this more and more CRA oppose that kind of policies. The more and more like LDP have to compromise to those parties. Then what will happen is that they will shrink the budget to necessary investments. And the problem here is that while those like semiconductor industry or meter industry requires tons of money, Japan cannot. What will happen in counterfactual here is that like they will not compromise in that kind of two perspective, and therefore they can like have the huge quicker and bigger investments, and therefore they have more advantage in competing like global market. Second things note on this argument here is second impact here is this will weaken the negative image towards CRA. The problem right now is that CRA is like seen as the party who opposes every time. It's repeatedly reported that like video of like opposing like politician of like CRA, and what is happening right now is that like so many people will see CRA as the one who make nothing but just oppose, and we will change this kind of perception by like changing the stance of CRA by like being the partially supportive to like Takaichi administration, and also have like なんかそういういい感じの yes.
So if CRA confirmed the same policy trajectory with LDP, why voter would want uniquely CRA to be powerful rather than if LDP do the same thing?
We're not necessarily saying that like CRA must beat LDP, but we can say about what CRA is losing right now is なんか reasonable なんか元気世代の liberal who wants some sort of growth の元気世代, and therefore like CRA will change will なんか get the vote from those people. Then last argument, why we have better electability. A couple of reasons. The first reason why the first reason for this is because they can get rid of the image of anti なんだっけ socialism 違う共産主義 anti socialism 反共主義 which means which like so many Japanese people like automatically like hate. But second reason why we have better electability is because we have more support to the labor union, because the what they are like, for example, like caring about is that if the degrowth of or the growing なんか down of a decrease of like, for example, stock price and so on, right? Because what happened in the past is like when the CRA, not CRA, 民主党 get administration, like stock price like significantly went down, then this like policy shift to like economic growth will change the perception from the market and investors. But third of all, they can like なんていうかな it's なんか beautiful, right? Because like they can like say, oh, we have growth, we have dream, and we can like なんかwe can come back to なんか generation of なんか bubble, and we なんか失われた30年 we will throw away, and it's so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the speech, calling up on Elo. And also for the POIs, I would appreciate if you guys could come closer to the device so that I can hear your POIs better. Thank you. I was able to hear your POI, but it's better if you come closer.
Okay. So CRA is the biggest opposition alliance that is existing in Japan. Now that LDP has won in the recent election, Takaichi president's policy is going to be easily passed with because they have the most number in the parliament. There's not going to be a large opposition to it because they have lots of like small parties allying with them, which means only by LDP they can just take over like 2/3 of all the parliament's votes, and that's why they don't really need to really try to counter anything else. So that's why CRA uniquely need to push a completely different policy in order to check and balance system to work, and also to balance out the power that the LDP currently has. Upstairs, they want CRA to be bigger, but it's meaningless if they try to forward the policy that's completely same with CRA. It doesn't have to be CRA. It can be like other small parties that align with LDP. So LDP is already the biggest party. They can, as I said, they can pass policy on their own, and that's why CRA uniquely has to, as I said, propose a completely different policy. So how's the check and balance going to work? So we get this works in two ways. So firstly, this looks like, for example, questioning and like scrutinizing when there's new policy passed, for example, wealth like redistribution and like all of these kinds of things. These are going to be carefully questioned because this CRA proposes a completely different policy. But secondly, we think that this also applies when the parliament decided like things like budget. For example, they're going to consider about things like corporate tax cut, insurance, and like these kind of things. And we think that CRA is a unique actor that can, for example, make like I don't know, maybe it might be minor, but make revises that align with people aligns with the interest of, for example, like poor people that the LDP doesn't really cater to. And that's why this check and balance is necessary. So next, let's talk about why in the counterfactual we can form enough check and balance by CRA enacting in this way. So two things. So firstly, we think that this simply means differentiation with the LDP policy. Simply this draws more attention, and also it gives people incentive to vote for you, because if you are enacting the same policy as LDP, why not just vote LDP? Because they have better chance to get elected, they have better power. If you vote for them, your interest is definitely going to be passed. Just voting a like smaller party doesn't really mean anything, and that's why you have to differentiate in order to get votes. And also, as I said, you get more attention because you have like these questions going on like parliament, you have like news broadcasts and all of these things attract people's attention, and that's why there's more scrutiny from the average general public people as well. Second thing is we think that in our side, when you oppose so basically LDP proposed economic growth, and CRA in our side proposed the other one, so welfare and sort of things. So we think that in our side, you get better cooperation with other opposition parties, for example, the Communist Party, Komeito, or other like smaller parties, and like these kinds of things. The reason is that simply the other opposition party also has the same interest with you. They want to go against the LDP. They want to, kind of like change the LDP's policies and so on. And that's why they have this unique incentive uniquely on our side. When you are at the CRA as the biggest opposition alliance, directly opposing with the LDP, they want to cooperate with you because you are the individual or like the alliance with the higher possibility to outcompete LDP. And that's why you can do things like, cooperated like proposals, and you can form like coalitions if you want, and therefore you're able to form better power in our side. So as I said, CRA has to uniquely do this because they are the biggest, they are the only one that can do this, and this is the uniqueness we propose. Next off, talking about why it's not strategic. Why it's really not strategic for CRA to align with LDP in order to gain power. But before that, yes?
So what economic policies do you support, or what redistributive policies do you support?
I don't know about the policy, but I think that simply having two different parties proposing two different ideas is something that means. I think that even if the policy in your side that is proposed by LDP is somewhat good, I think it has somewhat, it can't benefit all people, and we have to at least, I don't know, cater to a lot of people at the same time. So it doesn't really okay. Let's talk about why it's not strategic for CRA to align with LDP. So the first reason is that LDP is quite powerful. So two things. So firstly, we think that LDP has better trust network, human resources, and everything they have established in the past, like, decades that they have already experienced. They have trust from people. They know how to operate policy. They know how to, they have all the connections with people. That makes them easier to pass their policy. And that's why if you as a, CRA try to, go against them, there's very little chance that you can win them, because obviously people already trust the LDP. They're going to vote for LDP instead of you. And that's why going against LDP is a very bad strategy for CRA. And the second reason is that we think that LDP doesn't really have an incentive to cooperate with CRA in the first place, because as I said, they already have the number of seats they need, and also they have a lot of other parties that are aligning with them already, and therefore even if they don't really cooperate with CRA, they can pass their policy. And also they have no incentive to, for example, revise their policy in order for them to in order to benefit CRA, because they don't have to do it. And then it's better if LDP just pass the policy as they want, because that's the best way to cater to their voters. But we think that this happens on their side, and therefore we think that even if CRA try to align to LDP, it doesn't really give them much benefit, because they are just going to say yes to all of the LDP's policy, and it's not really something that is benefiting them. And also this means that check and balance is not going to happen, because there's not going to be a lot of like scrutiny and other things going on. So secondly, we think that the second reason why it's not strategic is in terms of viewer attraction, voter attraction, two things. So firstly, we think that CRA originally was a bit like agreeing to the redistribution rather than the economic growth, which means that if they suddenly try to promote economic growth, it becomes a sudden policy shift, which means that the people who originally supported the CRA has the incentive to shift to, for example, other small parties which have less chance to actually appeal in the government, or, I don't know, but change the votes that they are casting. So we think that simply CRA loses supporters that they originally had. And secondly, if CRA proposes economic growth policy, as I already talked about this, so the people who want economic growth, they're going to vote LDP, and therefore, in their vote, CRA is going to lose supporters that they already have, and there's not going to be new supporters. In the counterfactual, we think that you can retain supporters, and plus, we think that the people who have no other places to vote, people who just don't like the LDP policy, even if it's not about economic policy, they're going to vote for CRA, and that's why strategically, in our side, CRA has much more voting power in the parliament in our side, and that's why we have more check and balance and more leverage towards LDP, which is really good to balance out all the policies and stuff. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for the speech. Calling upon DPM here.
아, 잠깐만. 아까 이거なんで違う、赤い紙、そうよいしょ。Hey. Okay. The recent landslide won of Takaichi LDP shows that so every Japanese people support economic growth and no one supports the redistribution policies. So that is why that, for example, the aging generation support LDP compared to the CRA, and also the so labor unions support and labor union head of the labor union Rengo, so Yoshino moving to the so LDP compared to the CRA. So that is why these so removal of Shunto clearly shows that so even though the labor union that tend to be the left wing should support the so LDP in order to get more salaries, or increase of the salary is essential to protect the the livelihood of the every individual citizens. So that is why, so since the, firstly, that premise of the, opposition's argument that, someone in the citizens support redistribution policy is completely wrong, and no one support the redistribution policy at the first places, and because of the, looking at the mass voter bases like aging populations and labor union. So that is why we say that, firstly, based on the two arguments. Firstly, that parliament governance inside of the parliament is rather being horrible on the opposition paradigm because of the resistance of the CRA. And secondly, is about
for the upcoming Sangin elections, why the CRA can be uniquely like more decent choices in our side of the house. Before that, yes. No, okay. So, okay. Firstly, about the or governance inside of a parliament. They said about resistance is essential because of the check and balance system, but it is not true. Firstly, who support the redistributions? So they said about someone support, but who? So aging generation moved to vote for the LDP, or labor union suddenly moved to the like LDP to create the concession or government led salary increases in order to get more concrete number of salary up rate, so fighting back against the stable increase of the inflation rate. So that is why the current like trend of the Japanese left wing is in order to get like economic growth, so stable increase of the salary, the economic growth is somewhat like considerable issues inside of the inside of the political sphere. And secondly, the CRA resistance rather harms the parliamentary governance because LDP recently started to hold a Kokumin Kaigi for discussion for consumption tax removal. That is why, because the CRA is constantly opposed to this policy. So, and regardless of its small portion of the support inside of our parliament. And additionally, CRA is not invited for the Kokumin Kaigi discussion, and that is discussion, even though the CRA is the only party for against the consumption tax removal. So that is so abnormal because these policy making processes should be discussed inside of the parliament, but since the constant objection towards the LDP, so makes LDP to start to hold the another decision making party about the policy making. So that is why we said that even if the that policy is agreeable in terms of the voter basis, that kind of policy should be followed by the decision followed by CRA, and also that kind of discussion should be normalized inside of the inside of the parliament. In our side of the house, why that it can be smoother? Because the CRA do not object to the object to the any economic policy inside of the parliament. So that is why the LDP have massive incentive to hold the economic discussion inside of parliament. And also, secondly, these kind of policy investment to the Lapidus or investment to the AI data center, these kind of agreeable policy can be passed smoother, and investment can be going smoother on our side of our house. So that is why, since there's no additional dispute inside of parliament, these kind of everyone concede policy that everyone concede can be passed faster. So that since the investment should be done faster, and we can get the fruit faster, that is so clearly benefit to the citizen at the first place. And secondly, the uniqueness of the CRA. They said about economic policy is a unique political issue which is departed from the LDP and CRA. That is not true. That people, many left-wing person support the economic growth, but and also support same-sex marriage or choice of the surname or so on. So, but still, that economic policy is crucial for their daily livelihood. They unwillingly choose these economic growth policies. So that is why if CRA support for the economic growth, these left-wing person can easily support the CRA in order to achieve the more same-sex marriage policy or choice of the surname or revision of the anti-revision of the Article 9 or so on. So that is why if the CRA since CRA intentionally make the economic policy as an issue, these kind of so left-wing person unable to vote for the properly vote for the left wing. So that is why they cannot form any meaningful left-wing opposition party inside of the parliament. So that is why, in order to make the more so create a more so left-wing meaningful opposition party, we say that the economic policy is somehow the considerable choices for the CRA. So that is why firstly that so since the landslide win of the recent Shugin election, people tend to want to vote for the left-wing party inside of the balance the Sangin seat. So that is why the CRA can be decent candidate for a left wing to vote for in the next Sangin election. We plan to propose.
Thank you very much for the speech. Calling upon the LO. Here.
Hi. I'm so baffled by today's government themes because they claim they wanna make this this government this party to be more stronger because which is necessary. But I think at the same time they say, if CRA oppose this policy, we simply delay the discussion, delay the decision making. This is obvious contradictions. You desire to CRA to be declined because if they decline, simply ADP can decide it more speedily and so on. So it is obvious contradictions. But rather, we're happy to stand on the more simple stance that we simply want to make that, we want to make such a CRA to be more stronger and opposing such a LDP. This is a good types of the politics. 3 issues. Firstly, I want to talk about what is the counter policies we support because they ask in the POI. I think we are likely to support a policy which LDP cannot support. We are simply oppose LDP. So this is things like policy, tax for the rich people, the rich corporations, things like large corporations, also things like LDP can't decrease the social insurance, so we also do it and so on. So I think these things is we are likely to do these things. And note, this is a really important policies because even if at the very best case you can gain the economic on your side, but this money only go to the specific large corporation and never trickle down to the poor individuals. We do not support those type of things. So our policy is still necessary in order to decrease the capacity of the LDP to cut off such a taxation for the rich corporations and so on. Cool. Firstly, about the economies, I think their argument is about they say if CRA oppose this policy, it's likely to delay and they lose the things like first mover advantage and so on. I have 2 responses for you. Firstly, first mover advantage. This is completely untrue in the first place because the Japanese no longer take a first mover advantage. That is a third or the fourth mover advantage. It cannot increase such an economic growth in the first place because already Taiwan or the Korea or the many other countries already holds most of the market. So I'm really unsure is what kinds of what is the extent of the economy you can gain in the first place. But secondarily, I think they say shrink the market. But I'm really unsure the reasons why the status quo economy is not enough on our side because under the status quo. Like semiconductor with AI is a really big boundless industry. So already private individuals investing a huge money into these places. So I'm really unsure the reasons why state needed to subsidize in the first place. But more importantly, now I take the hard stance. If CRA oppose, this policy will be delayed. However, this is completely good. Here's the reasons because it's good as a politics. Deepens the we are likely to have we are likely to deepen the discussion. We are likely to discuss the potential ideas or the different ideas and the potential risk on us as a whole. This is completely good things as a politics. Furthermore, if in 4 years it escalates at a large extent, we lose the opportunity to ask voters Do you agree with this policy? Or simply, we cannot reflect their opinion into the politics. So even at the best case, if I become really charitable to your side, sure, maybe citizens want to increase the economy now, but after the 4 years, they might oppose this policy because it's actually harming your life and so on. We don't need to ask it. We don't need to delay. But thirdly, also media, we are likely to uniquely have such information about the potential risk of such economic growth policies. We are likely to have a more discussion on outside the house because especially insofar as state parties create an agenda about these policies, this is the unique reasons why media are likely to talk about those issues more strongly, and we are likely to have such a discussions. Those things, those information is still important, even if citizens agree with this idea, because if we lack such like information about the potential risk, simply citizens cannot consent to these issues. For those reasons, in terms of the politics, our side is better in terms of the principle. Okay, now I want to talk about why this is practically worsens the economy on their side of the house. 3 things. Firstly, simply LDP is fucking corrupted with large corporations, and which likely to cause disintermediation like Nakanuki and so on. The reason behind it is very simple. Many voters many voters of the LDP is likely to be large tech corporations or large unions. So which means historically here's a huge fucking connection exists. So if we lack the scrutiny, if we lack a like opposition power to oppose LDP simply use money for such as their like nepotisms. It is completely harmful. But on our side, firstly, simply we can scrutinize those issues, so we can prevent the money go to such a fucking nepotism wars, and we might have a potential to use such a money for another corporations which have no connection with the LDP. Simply we can diversify the investment, but even at the worst case, we still delay the policies. That is still better. Secondarily, even if it is not corrupted, it kills the economy. This policy kills the economy because which causes a monopoly. This is a very basic economy, right? Which means if specific number of the corporation get a disproportionate power from the government, simply it kills the market. It causes monopolies because other corporations which do not receive a subsidy from the government cannot win this specific corporation who gets the money from the government. That is why we're happy to stand on the free market. We shouldn't monopolize the market. We should minimize the state intervention in the market. Thirdly, about the semiconductors, I think I want to ask semiconductors or the AI that they describe precisely. I want to ask, is it actually a good policy in the first place? I did not think so. And because the reason behind is that, again, semiconductors AI is already its market is already like deprived by the many more strongest corporation and countries like Taiwan or Korea or the US or many other countries. But more importantly, even if Japan now can outcompete, I think it is also not a good idea because if you do it, US might hate you. US might increase the tariff for you and so on. Anyway, there's a potential risk and the potential risk. There's many types of potential risk exist. I succeeded to suggest this idea now, which means we need more precise discussion. We need to delay this policy. If you fail to use such a huge money into the one specific policy, now it might kill the citizens in the next 4 years, and we fail to ask the citizens whether or not you actually think this policy is a good idea in the first place. That is why, in terms of politics and in terms of practically, we need to have a deepened discussions and we need to delay these policies. So very proud to both.
Thank you very much for the speech, calling upon government to behave.
Okay. Many people in Japan, like ourselves, want socially liberal policies. Many people at the same time want economic growth, perhaps a little more than social policies. These people have nowhere to go in the status quo. Opposing everything is a tested bad strategy that has not worked in the past decade, in the past 20 years, in the past 30 years, and it will not work into the future. What we do is we combine economic growth and socially liberal policies. That is the trademark of Chugakaren, and we think that moves politics forward, that focuses political discussions on socially liberal policies, and that it enhances the power of opposition parties in Japan, and that is a good thing. Response to their claim that, we're just supporting LDP, and that, everything that LDP does, we support. This misses the point, because our claim is that economic growth, go ahead, LDP should do what they want. However, there are other things that we are not in agreement with. These are things like remilitarization of Japan. These are things like socially liberal policies, same-sex marriage, being able to choose your surname, all that stuff. We want to focus on these things because these things are where the Chugakaren is likely to have a comparative advantage in today's society. Firstly, I want to talk about why Chugakaren will have more electability on the other side of the house. Their claim is that, you have to have different policies in order to be able to differentiate yourself from the LDP. And their method, basically, is to oppose everything. Our claim is that you don't have to differentiate yourself based on economics, because obviously there are other areas where you're different. For example, social policies. The question in this debate is whether or not it is easier to fight on the grounds of economic policies or on social policies, and we argue it is far easier to win back the voter base on social grounds. Why is that the case? Firstly, because growth is preferable to the vast majority of individuals in Japan compared to redistributive policies. Why is this true? 3 reasons. Firstly, majority of the population in Japan are not recipients of seikatsu-hogo, for example. But majority do work, and they do care about salary. They do care about the future of the Japanese economy, and that is why they are far more likely to think of economic policies that are conducive to economic growth as proximate to their life, as proximate to their well-being compared to redistribution that they don't really see the benefit of because they're not the direct recipients of those policies. Secondly, there is a strong association of redistributive policies to socialism and to communism as an extension of that. By the way, if they do want to differentiate themselves based on economic policies and support redistributive policies, they have to go big in this debate because the LDP already support things like, imposing higher taxation on entrepreneurs that are that have sold their stocks by doing IPO, for example. They have decided to tax individuals that have gained a lot of money through merger and acquisition, for example. This is why Mitsushi was very angry today on Instagram story because he thought his money is going to be taken away by the Takaichi administration. So to the extent they support differentiation, they have to enhance this image of, doing everything that communists have been doing and have been failing in the past. But, and also this Shakai Hokenryo thing, they're the people that are trying to increase this because this is redistribution, right? But thirdly, people want Japan to be stronger because they have the image of Japan as number one, for example, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and they want to strengthen this image, and they, obviously are stuck to this image. All of the things that we've explained from first speaker, and we received no response to. What does this mean in this debate? Firstly, you're not persuasive on their side of the house, and you will never be. That's why you don't have to make it an issue in this debate, and that's what we do on our side of the house. But secondly, you will accelerate the image that you've been suffering from for the past 20 years, that you're opposing everything that the LDP does, and you don't have even a hint of reasonableness in today's society. We change all of that on the other side of the house. So how do you exactly win voters on the other side of the house? We win voters based on socially liberal policies. That is, again, the hallmark of opposition parties in Japan. How does this work? Firstly, in the status quo, there is a huge trade-off, which, like I explained to you already in my introduction. There are families that care a lot about growth and care also about, same-sex marriage, but they probably care about growth more because this is more proximate to their life. They probably don't think about, same-sex marriage as something that's really going to impact their life insofar as they're not, homosexual, for example, insofar as they're already married and they've chosen a family name. This is why people prioritize economic policies and they vote LDP, even if they have a slight preference towards same-sex marriage, slight preference towards, being able to choose their family name. We change this dynamics because now Chugakaren also supports your economic growth, and on top of that, they are socially liberal. This is an incentive for you now to vote Chugakaren because, they care about your life as well. They will increase your salaries, and at the same time, they do socially liberal policies. That is why you're likely to win back these voters. But secondly, you're able to change how elections work, because in the status quo, Jiminto can make economic growth the single issue in elections. And people will have a debate about this, politicians will have a debate on this, and you will lose. You change that dynamics to one that focuses on socially liberal policies, because this is the difference in election on the our side of the house. For all of those reasons, you're far more likely to be able to reach out to voters that are actually quite centrist, that are actually quite liberal, which are unable to win under their side of the house because you keep on focusing on economic growth, which people do no longer have any, feeling of opposition to. That is why under our side of the house, you increase accountability. On the our side of the house, when, Chugakeren wins back a lot of voters, your mandate is clear. People think of socially liberal policies as important. This is why, for example, now, Jiminto might even have an incentive to incorporate these policies to their agenda and make themselves liberal into the future, because they know that this issue is important and people care about these issues. That is why you're far more likely to be successful as an opposition party on the other side of the house. They said, you can't cooperate with opposition parties. We can. There are differences. But despite the differences, opposition parties in Japan have cooperated for the longest period of time. I don't think this trend will change just because of this change. Finally, on delay of discussion and policies that drive the economy forward. Obviously, their claim is that you don't have to grow anymore because Japan is already quite good economics-wise. This is not true insofar as people suffer from inflation, for example. So there is a need for economic growth. Their claim was that first mover advantage doesn't exist. The market is already monopolized by Taiwan. This is true, but this is changing because the US has an incentive to pivot away from Taiwan insofar as there's geopolitical risks. That is why they have an incentive, and they also have decided to invest a lot of money into Japan, for example. But if you are delaying this discussion, they might change their decision. They might not invest into your economy as much as they're willing to in the status quo. So you can't miss this chance, and the opportunity cost is big. I think this is an independent impact that also let us win this debate. For all of those reasons, we clearly win.
Thank you very much for the speech. Calling upon opposition rep here.
In the last election of House of Representatives, the slogan from CLA was 生活者 first, which is kind of lame and fucked up since we don't get what they want. What is the clear stances from CLA? That's why we need our largest opposition party, still our largest opposition party in Japan, to be the supporter of workers, to be the protector of the poor and minorities, which is the concrete political interest in Japan. The reason why the Masabe thinks that no one supports the economic redistribution is because there are wide and weird agreement on the cut the consumption tax among many parties, and because DDP's policies, like Kokumin Minshito's policies, like reduct the tax on petrol, remove the cap on income, like 103万円の壁 or whatever, became popular. And it seems like a very small number of parties, like Communist Party, was the only one proposing the sort of classic economic distribution by taxing the rich. But that doesn't simply mean that people don't care about redistribution. What they don't care about is the means of redistribution, the means that they get support. But they do care about is more money, more cheap commodity, more support and aid for the life on a daily basis. To be clear, this isn't about the actor motion. This isn't about debate about whether we want economic growth or redistribution. What we need to do and argue is that what kind of political stance and rhetoric and politics policies that CLA needs to push in order to have better political sphere as a whole. And we believe it is the huge loss for the public once CLA chooses not to confront to the core policy of the LDP. So I'd like to firstly clarify a few pushes that we got from side government. First thing is that they claim that LDP also pushes the economic redistribution. They also support the increase, taxation on rich. They can also combine the both trajectory of redistribution, help, and economic growth at the same time. I think
this is simply false, because it is quite unlikely for LDP is able to prioritize these issues to enough extent at the expense of the other issues that LDP prioritize, like economic growth, because the main donor and main supporter basis of the LDP is a large conglomerate, a large, local businesses in Yamaguchi or Hiroshima, whatever, these voting, historically strongly supporting LDP as a voting district. It is a political suicide for LDP to also push a somewhat, diluted milquetoast policy push about, we also kind of want redistribution. We also kind of want help workers. And I think it is very unlikely that this decision-making within the structure of LDP to got a majority support to begin with. Second thing then Tota talk about is the CLA still supports same-sex marriage. They still, talk about the social policies that go against LDP. This is very, very weak response, because why would those policies then get more attention on their side? Why would CLA can get enough support and competence by just singular pushes of the social policy? Because the opposite that I can say is that why not just differentiate on the ground of economy too, in order to get more clear-cut understanding for the voters to understand who cares about the weak people, who cares about the minority. Rather, when your only differentiation becomes social policy, that is also a political suicide, because it is much more easy for LDP to politicize you, to say that, these people now loses the competence on economy and leverage on economy because they failed at 2010. They don't know about any shit about economy. That's why their only competence and the only push became same-sex marriage, or the, all the same liberal, bullshit or whatever. And I think these types of strong right-wing politicization hit the CLA harder when they lose the argument on the ground of economy. Two things. One, discourse and policy making, and quickly about the optics. First and mainly about discourse and policy making. So the first thing I want to point out is, as we already, continuously told you, it is really weird of Gov to suggest that we want CLA to be strong, but we don't want CLA to go against the economic policy, whereas the most strong and competent push of LDP is precisely the economic policy, and in the means of accountability needs to be there at the core argument of how much money we need to allocate among the state budget to choose certain economic policy. They talk about the beneficial economic policy get delayed. There will be lots of opportunity costs. Whatever. Firstly, I think if those very specific decision-making about the investment on semiconductor, for instance, is an issue which is unquestionably beneficial for Japan, and there is no controversy around it, I don't know why CRA will use resources to oppose this niche policy to begin with. But secondly, even if they oppose every single fucking investment proposal raised by LDP, it's good to have some delays, because we need to scrutinize more. We need to check how much budget is allocated to each policy. We need CRA to keep involving the process of decision-making, which is really, really important. But lastly, what we don't want is the overreach of the quick decision-making by LDP, which is their stance is very convenient. Say, there's a good policy by LDP. That's why we don't want to delay it. But I think, what if CLA gradually losing the ground and say over LDP politician in the Congress as a whole? The most critical harm is the CLA lose the say over the Congress about the state budget discussion when CLA's only push became the social policy, which is very difficult to argue that why they need to allocate more money on welfare, for instance, because they now lose the economic ground to justify that why we need to put more money on the pockets of the worker for the sake of as a means of the welfare, rather than some other policies to cutting tax. Because now it seems to it's okay. Yeah,
it's okay. Okay. So why can we not scrutinize better when we agree on the basic direction of the policy, but might disagree with, for example, nepotism within the framework of the same policies?
I think it is quite difficult that if your party as a whole align with the same policy trajectory with one party, and you still trying to seems like a blocking the passing, the policy being passed. If you want to scrutinize the policy, your stance needs to be clear-cut, that you opposes the core idea and structure of the policy, that's the more easiest ground that even with the weaker opposition party to take a hold accountable of the ruling party in Japan. So what I mean by this is that you need a concrete economic ground to check and balance and scrutinize an economic policy raised by LDP, and we need a strong logical and justification on the economic ground to fight against LDP.
Thank you very much for the speech. Calling up on opposition reply. Hey.
Okay. So our goal is not that CRA outcompetes LDP. This is not an actor motion. We do not need to prove that CRA is going to win against LDP. We think that CRA, just being the largest opposing alliance and actually casting doubt of every single policy that LDP proposes, it itself is a great benefit that the citizens, especially the people, at least 5 or 10% of people who actually do support the CRA right now, they want that to happen, and we think that this is also beneficial to a lot of citizens who are voting to LDP as well, because they simply balance out all the policy for LDP. So what does the government side today suggest? I think that they only have they really have two positive materials. So firstly, they say that they can attract vote on their side by pushing the liberal policy. I think this is quite late for GovWhip to propose this, and I think this doesn't make sense in the first place. The problem of this argument is that you can do it in our side if you want. As we propose from the leader of opposition, we're going to oppose every single policy that the LDP proposes as they claim. So which means that we can still push liberal policy on their side. So the point that they never proved is that if they aligned with LDP in the economic policy specifically, it makes CRP powerful. It makes CRP popular. They have totally no mechanism, and also we are the one who provided you with actual mechanism that in our side uniquely, where you differentiate with LDP, you're going to have more votes because you have more attention, and also if you align with LDP, there's no reason for people to vote for you because simply they can just vote for LDP, and that's what we tell you, and that's why their side's argument have totally no mechanism, and this first claim instantly fails. So what we tell you on this ground is that we attract much more better strategic position for CRA, because firstly they get more votes because they can cater to the people who don't like the LDP policy, every single people who don't like the LDP policy. And secondly, we told you that you're going to have more cooperation with the opposing party. They said that in the government side there's uniquely going to be cooperation. This is obviously not true. This is obviously false. They never explained why. We already told you, for example, if a specific opposing party opposes against LDP with the education policy, they're going to have CRA that opposes with the exact same policy. If they opposes to LDP with this issue of healthcare, they have CRA that is opposing to LDP. That's why these opponent party uniquely have the incentive to cooperate with CRA on our side, and that's why CRA is able to hold better power on our side. And we already explained to you why check and balance is going to happen on our side, which didn't get really a lot of engagement from their side as well. So therefore, we already proved to you that check and balance is going to exist better on our side. CRA is going to have better power, and therefore they're going to balance out. The next claim they forward is that this is going to delay policy. The problem is they never proved why this is bad, why economic policy is that urgent. You have to pass it that fast. The delay is going to be maximum, for example, few months. Is that so crucial for people? I don't think this is true. So they never explain why this delay is bad and why economic policy is absolutely good for all citizens, why redistribution isn't necessary. So we think that even if redistribution isn't necessary. And for example, like let's take their best case and say that economic policy is really urgent. We have to pass it right now. Even so, we think that discussion is very important because right now, we told you from the very first of our speech, because Takaichi-san has won the election, a lot of policy is very easier to pass. And that's why uniquely right now there needs a counterbalance that, that actually casts out of all of the policy that these people forward. And that's why, even if we get delayed, we think that this is good because it's better. Because, for example, like in their world, I don't know how much people it is, but like 5 or 10% of the people's opinions is just going to be ignored. And our side, at least they're able to take into account. And we think that, as I told you, this policy is not urgent, and therefore this delay is not important, which means that our side's benefits is much more important in terms of better outcome of the policy that the people have. Very proud to post.
Thank you very much for the speech. Calling upon government reply.
Okay, so two claims coming from the opposition. First is a more efficient scrutinize from the all scrutinize of the LDP policy is good coming from the opposition, and second is that more redistribution policy happened on the opposition. Firstly, more scrutinize. They said about more scrutinize for the LDP policy is important because so somehow the nepotism economic policy happened and we have to check them. But we think that is not true. Firstly, we can achieve more selective scrutinize on our side of the house. Basically, CRA agree on the most of the economic policy and oppose for the mainly for the social policies and also nepotized economic policy. So that is more efficient scrutiny can conduct on our side of the house. That since the time is limited and also that is most strategic for the CRA because CRA have huge incentive to concentrate on the social policy that is militarization of Japan or so on. So that is why we said that since time is limited, CRA should use this limited time for the more arguable policy at the first place. And secondly, that more effective scrutinize happen based on the assumption that more electability of the next election. Since make scrutinize more effective, these CRA need to get more seat in the parliament because that if the limited seat in the parliament, they don't have enough time for the questioning the prime minister inside of parliament. So that is why that CRA have to make the policy that is palatable for the majority of the individual. So based on that, second, so that is why on their side of the house, so they have very limited time on the scrutinization because they oppose every single policy in the parliament and they do not focus on some important policy, social policy. And second, they said about redistribution is still important. So, but that is quite ambiguous on their side of the house because our question is what demography support the redistribution policy in the current space? And since most of the labor unions support LDP to make the concession and make the large corporation to salary up, right? So that is why the main claim coming from the oppositions LDP. Main supporter of the LDP is big corporation, so they are manipulated by the big corporation. But that is not true. so our example clearly shows that the LDP still have incentive to make the salary up on a daily basis, and because of the LDP are so variety of the supporter of the LDP. So that is why in our side of the house, still the redistribution policy happen on our side of the house. So that is why the margin is so small. So lastly, about the economic growth, that since they so they said, delay is good, but it is quite assumption, right? So since they said about more scrutiny happen, then more precise policy or efficient policy can be conducted. But we said we clearly say that there's a clear opportunity cost for the especially for the economic investment, because if Japan missed the opportunity of the investment to the AI data center or semiconductor, then other countries have strong strong position to make huge amount of investment, and we cannot protect the strategically important goods and services and own product to secure them. So that is why we said about these policy should be bring more that should be passed more faster, and that is a clear benefit coming from the proposition that we proudly propose.
Thank you very much for the amazing debate. I will take some time for my deliberation. So, I mean, it's just me, so I'm just gonna mute myself and then I'll call you guys.